What's up and welcome to my review of set 75399, the Rebel U-Wing Starfighter. This is an 8+ set with 594 pieces as well as 4 unique minifigures. This set has some nice box art with the planet in the background as well as an Andor themed box art style that wraps around the whole sides of the box. Looking toward the back of the box, you can see your ship in more detail as well as some different play features. Now let's get right on into this review. Starting off with our 4 minifigures, we have Cassian Andor, K2SO, Daedra Miro, as well as an ISB tactical agent. Starting off with our Cassian Andor minifigure, I think LEGO did a pretty solid job on this figure. I think the printing on the front is pretty good with some nice detailing, I have to say. As we flip around to the back, you can see still having some detail as well as some minimal printing, and you also have an alternate face back there as well. Flipping back to the front, I think an area that they exceeded here in my expectations was definitely with the torso printing, especially on the belt with that nice little metallic buckle, and overall just having some pretty nice detailed printing, especially on the jacket. Overall, I think this is a very good minifigure. Let's move on to K2SO. Now, K2SO is definitely the highlight minifigure for many people when it comes to this set, being that it's been so long since we got our previous version, and that previous version is quite expensive on the aftermarket today, but now we have an updated version that's not only exclusive to this set, but you can also get it in the buildable K2SO set. One of my favorite details throughout the whole K2SO minifigure is definitely the Imperial logo on the side of the shoulder. I think it looks great with the printing and definitely adds another level to this figure. Turning around to the back is definitely a spot that lacks quite a bit of detail, but with this mold and the new mold that LEGO had to make for this figure, it makes sense that there's no printing back there. There's not like there was any room to print on in the first place, and it's not really the biggest issue. It would have been cool, but I think the rest of this minifigure is great. Next up, we have Daedra Miro, who might actually be my favorite figure from this set. Starting off at the top, we have her hat that is actually molded into her hair, which looks great in my opinion, and was one of the best pieces used on this minifigure. Moving down to the actual torso, that has a lot of different print, which I think looks very good to, signify that the coat that she is wearing in the show. Then moving down to the belt that has the holster that comes down to the legs as well and comes alongside the printing. Now, one of my biggest complaints and something that is definitely shared by the community is the fact that this figure does not have dual molded legs. I think that would have elevated this figure so much, especially as we turn around to the back of the minifigure. It becomes even more apparent when looking at the back of the legs. It just looks a little bit out of place, and it definitely would have made this figure like 10 times better. It would have been a 10 out of 10 minifigure in my opinion if it did have those dual molded legs, but other than that, I think it has some great printing, and I think that hat/hair piece looks great. Next up is our ISB tactical agent, equipped with a shield as well as a blaster. Taking those away to get a better look at the printing underneath, it is pretty basic, but does have some pretty good detail in my opinion. I think the torso is done pretty great, and I also looking toward the hip piece that has printing on it as well. Definitely brings this figure all together and rounded, and it has even printing on the legs and even the toes of this minifigure as well. They kind of went all out for that. Moving on to the back, it's a lot more basic and less detailed, but it's kind of what you are expecting, and no alternate face, as it would show through the back of the hat. And overall, I think it's a pretty solid minifigure, but it would have been cool to have gotten another one in this set. Now, as we shift our attention to the build of the U-Wing itself, I think there's definitely a lot of ups and downs when it comes to this model. Now, because this set is downsized, it definitely sacrifices some play features, but it makes up for it in its sleekness as well as the level of detail that it holds. Starting off by looking at our wings that have a pretty large amount of detail, but because of the small size, it can actually be split in the middle. So LEGO included this black plate, which I think looks pretty good and definitely does get the point across. Then we get to the thrusters, which I'll talk about a little bit later, as they're definitely one of the low points when it comes to this set. I do have to say that the design and model here was done very well. There is a pretty high amount of detail with a couple of stickers as well as some other just plates and pieces used about, and I think that this set is a great one for displayability if you overlook the fact of the engines that we'll talk about a little bit later. There's even some play features as you come up detailed with this small sticker on the front, and you can see your 2 weapons as well as your spring-loaded shooters, which all you have to do is press down on this little bar and they both shoot out. Is a very fun mechanism and a great play feature in my opinion. I love when LEGO integrates these stud shooters to be hidden away, and then you just press and they fire out just like that, and you can't even really tell that they're there unless you are looking in from the front. Now, as we move our attention to the cockpit, which is actually put in very nicely and sunken in well into the ship, you're actually going to see the main way to open this is with this little knob at the back. And once you start it open, you can pull the rest open up with your fingers and then get inside of your very small cockpit that has a sticker detail at the front. Now, this is probably one of my biggest issues when it comes to this set, is how small the interior is. You can sit down your Cassian Andor minifigure, as you would in any other the ship, but oh no, your cockpit does not close. Actually, to get this minifigure in, he has to lounge all the way back just to close it, which in my opinion looks very bad. It just doesn't look right having him laying all the way back. He can't even reach the controls unless he's controlling the ship with his feet, which definitely is not the case, and I just think that this is probably one of the worst parts about this set. But I will say that the cockpit popping mechanism is pretty satisfying and definitely is one of the highlights when it comes to this whole part of the build. Now, as we move behind the cockpit, I think this area looks pretty cool where the mechanism is placed in, and you have all of these different grates as well as this circular thing. However, something that does not look good, in my opinion, is definitely the thrusters on this set. I think that they look very bad. And the reason that I think this is that there is no gradient when it comes to these thrusters. They don't look too bad from the front, but as you come around to the back, it becomes even more apparent. Now, it's just there's no gradient in the buildup. It goes from insanely thin and sleek to just the big fat thrusters on the front, and when you look toward the source material, there definitely should be some more gradient there and not just the massive jump, especially here on the Technic area, which doesn't look that good in my opinion either, but I think that the overall issue here is definitely the thrusters, and it's definitely the worst part about this build and a display standpoint in my opinion. Now, there are a couple of these false doors throughout this set, which I guess isn't the right way to say it, but they are like small Technic areas where they are connected to get an angle, but I do think that this is definitely a missed opportunity where LEGO could have included some sort of storage mechanism. You easily could have fit some sort of blaster back there, and then as we come around to the main portion of the ship where you would load your troops into, you have your door, which is a little bit challenging to pull down if you have bigger fingers, but once you get it down, it's connected by these two ball joints, and then you gain access to the interior of your ship that is quite small that we'll talk about in just a second. Now, I will say that the detail here is pretty good, and it is a fun inclusion that they have this area, and you can technically fit 2 minifigures, but as you grab your casting Andor, he doesn't really fit in here at all. It's a little bit too short to put him in there with his hairpiece on, meaning that the best way to get him in there is to take off his hairpiece, which should not be the case. You shouldn't have to give your characters a buzz cut for them to sit inside of your ship. If LEGO had just made this literally 1 plate taller, it wouldn't be an issue, but because it is not, then you actually cannot fit your minifigure in here, which really sucks. I will say it looks pretty good once closed up, and I especially like the window piece. Now we have another one of these little false door type things at the bottom of the front of the ship that uses this clear piece. It kind of signifies as a window that, once again, I think definitely could have been utilized to have some sort of storage or even just some little play feature hidden about there, but instead it's just quite the missed opportunity. Now, it's not really easy to open as it's not meant to be open, but if LEGO is going to be putting these pieces here to get the angle, I think that they definitely should be capitalizing on this unused space. Now, if you know the U-Wing from Star Wars, then you know that there are 2 different positions that this can be held in. And looking toward the ball joints on the side of this ship is actually how you're going to be able to change this from mode to mode. You simply just open your wings up. It's pretty satisfying, and it clicks into place using these ball joints and the little hinges on either side, and they click in very nice and they hold up pretty good. I will say, in my opinion, once it is in this kind of variation, it looks pretty bad. I'm not really sure what it is. I think it just loses its kind of displayability. Don't get me wrong, it's very cool, and it's a great play feature. It's a lot of fun to move these wings open and closed. It just doesn't look great. Looking toward the hinge pieces as well, where it's just this big gap, and then you also have the ball joint pieces sticking out on your wings, which doesn't look great in my opinion either. And I just think that it is much better in its normal configuration versus this configuration where it just looks a bit wonky in my opinion. From the back, it definitely does look a bit better. However, it's definitely not enough to redeem the very ugly engines. Also, when your wings are open, it does leave this pretty large gap above your door, which looks pretty bad, but does make it a lot easier to make the door, so there definitely is a plus and also a minus there as well. It's just something that I figured would be worth noting. And when you want to close these back up, you simply just pull them closed and they click right into place given those ball joints. And personally, I don't think that the ball joints look too great, but I do think that they are the best way to get these different wing configurations, and it is a very fun play feature, and I do think that the ball joints work very well for that. Now, one of the most important factors when it comes to these kind of sets are the structure as well as the swooshability. And I have to say, it's something that this set does very well. I can hold it pretty much wherever I want, even from one of the engines, and it holds up. This is a very sturdy model, which I have to give it credit for. I can pick it up, I can shake it around, I can do whatever I want with it, and it's not going anywhere. And I do have to say, it's a very swooshable model. And it's a lot of fun to bring this from one configuration to another, and it just adds a lot of fun to this play feature. So it definitely gets some added points for being so structurally sound as well as very swooshable. Now, as for my closing thoughts regarding this set, I do think while the build is massively undersized and doesn't really do it justice as a playset, there's definitely still some fun features that I have to say it also looks pretty good on display if you look past the thrusters on the back, which I think is the one caveat there, in the fact that I think they look pretty bad, especially if you are going to display. But when you're looking toward the front of this set, I think it looks pretty good, and I think it can definitely get away as a display set, and I think that it definitely is lacking in those play features as a playset, especially when compared to the older version. However, there is something worth noting there, because I believe that older version, if adjusted for inflation, would be about $130 retail today, versus this being $70, which yes, I do think is a bit on the pricier side when looking toward this set. I think maybe wait for it to go on sale. Definitely isn't a day one purchase for most people. I feel like this will be very easy and accessible to find on 20% off minimum. I feel like it might even go deeper than that at some like different like sale holiday type things, but I would say 20% off is a pretty good benchmark unless you're a huge fan of Andor and you want this day one, because I will say the one saving grace here is all of our different minifigures. I think Cassian Andor is pretty solid. I think the IBS officer is also pretty solid, but where this set goes above and beyond, in my opinion, is our K2SO minifigure as well as our Daedra minifigure. I think they are both some great minifigures and make this set kind of worth it if you wanted to pick it up day one. But personally, wait for 20% off. I don't think it's a bad set. I don't think it's a great set. If I had to give it a rating, I think I'd give it like a 5.5 or a 6 out of 10. But let me know down below in the comments if this is a set that you guys have picked up or one that you're waiting on picking up in the future, and if what your thoughts are on this set. Thank you all so much for watching. Stay safe. Drew signing out.